Welcome back. Now, Makerere University is in the process of reviewing most of its academic programs, and at least 31 courses may be phased out. The university said the latest move, in which courses such as Bachelors in Leadership and Governance, Office and Information Management, Wildlife Health and Management, and Masters of Religious Studies, among others, may be completely phased out due to a budgetary shortfall. Does this decision belie the crisis which has engulfed Makerere University? To answer this question on Talk of the Nation tonight, I'm joined by Makerere University Law Don, Dr. Busiteema and Kyambogo. Good evening, Dr. Busiteema.
Good evening, Oksana.
Welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Thank you.
When we have courses being phased out at the university, we cannot help but wonder, is there a process and a policy that guides the selection of courses that will be offered?
For a long time, it has been a rather haphazard. Yeah, the Senate is supposed to approve all courses, but for a long time, there was this whole wet courses, wet units, dry units, whereby with the privatization policy and units being almost encouraged to take on as many private students as they could and respond to the market as fast as they could, then you had some sort of, I would not say autonomy, but you had what I think was a less serious regulation than could have been. So you had a lot of these courses passing by under the radar.
Okay, we'll get to the question of privatization a little later on in the discussion. It is no secret that the university is crippled with a budgetary deficit and lecturers have gone without pay for months. Could there be a relationship between the phasing out of courses and the financial squeeze at the university? I
think they're directly related. I think there's a question of lack of commitment from the central government, which is because let's be honest, the university makes money, students pay, but there's also a very real commitment that's needed from the central government in terms of meeting its part of the bargain. That commitment has not been coming really, in the sense of either delayed payments or non-payments at all. So you can't expect a university to survive without support, real financial support. And I think we have seen this sort of almost even contempt towards higher education from the executive that I think speaks very badly for where we're headed as a nation. You cannot emphasize primary education and secondary education and then somehow kill the idea of higher education. And I think that, in a sense, is the root of all of this. But at the same time, I think it's also a failure of imagination, perhaps, on the part of the university administration, because, in a sense, you have units which are trying to be let me say innovative and creative, to respond to the market, to try to survive. And what they're doing now is to almost cap them at the knees, to say, well, for one reason or another, you can't offer this. But precisely because with the changes over the past 2 years, everyone is paid at the center. They're phasing out part-time lecturers who are extremely important in terms of sort of carrying the weight of the university courses, and then trying to get us, the permanent staff, to carry a higher burden than necessary. But of course, on our part, we say we're hired and asked to, I have to do a certain minimum of hours. If I've met my minimum, I have no obligation to do more. Especially if you're not paying me for the extra mile. We're not being paid, since I think, for August, September incentive allowance. Okay. So if you can't incentivize me to do extra, then you can't require me to do extra. But you're firing the people who could have done extra at a certain minimum wage. So there are these things which are linked together, which somehow I don't think clear thought is going into the university.
Considering the apparent lack of commitment on the central government's part, and the fact that we seem to see a dwindling of intellectual capacity at the university in terms of experienced lecturers, shouldn't the university be thinking about cutting its court according to its size? Just simply restrict yourself to courses that you can teach to ensure quality education.
I think that's part of the answer, but at the same time, even the courses that we can teach, in a sense, you still have the challenge of the evening classes. Now, each lecturer typically, I just speak for law, for instance, has minimum 2 courses on the day program and the evening courses. So you find yourself with Monday, Wednesday, Thursday for the day, and that's just one course. Then the other course will do Tuesday and something else, and Saturdays. Then you have to teach in the evening, then you have to mark. At the end of the day, there's a limit to your effectiveness. So I think at one point, unless you're going to say we're going to cut all the courses and remain perhaps just one Bachelor of Laws, which I think will be killing the university. But
the university is dying anyway.
And so I think it must be revived. So I think it must be revived. I don't think it can be encouraged to die slowly. or given Panadol or some other sort of, you know. I think some serious commitment must get back into the university. The government must accept its role as the support of this institution. Otherwise, we all lose. I'll just tell you, for instance, this past week I was in South Sudan and I was having lunch with a number of academics who have left Makerere, and they're getting paid. The incentives there to go to South Sudan are very high, because in one case, someone was telling me what he gets paid in a month was equivalent to his salary for a year.
No kidding.
Now, people are leaving. People respond to incentives, and they will leave, and they'll keep living. So you'll have this hemorrhage of very quality staff, very experienced staff, some of whom have benefited from schemes from Makerere, for instance, Leave, etc. So unless something is done to stem the tide of decay, I think we shall have mediocre universities, mediocre students, and eventually poor public policy.
I think we're actually already having that. It's not a thing of the future. It's already happening now.
Precisely, but it can be stemmed right now.
Okay. Now, in his book, Scholars in the Marketplace, Professor Mahmoud Mamdani criticizes the 1999 reforms at the institution. He condemns what he describes as, and I quote, Makerere's embrace of a crudely defined market as mere commercialization, encouraged by a government eager to abandon its own responsibility for public higher education. He also interrogates the deficiency of staff and space. So the question is, was the privatization largely a commercial issue and therefore not put to test before implementation?
I think there's a lot to be said about us having been pushed into a policy that we were not very clear about. I don't think we had a choice. Reading Professor Ezra Suma's book, for instance, Advancing the Ugandan Economy, in addition to Mamdani's, I think gives a very interesting window into what happened. The clear forces that were arranged against governments that forced us into certain decisions that were not really well thought out. So it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy of power relations, and I think the experience of Makerere and other higher learning institutions across, and it's not just Makerere actually, it's just a clear decay across Africa. University of Ghana, Legon, University of Lagos, and others, you see universities dying across Africa. Now, if you combine it with some sort of a laissez-faire attitude that continues post this, because, you know, the mistake that has happened can be corrected. It has happened with cooperatives that were allowed to die before, and now you see circles being reintroduced. And precisely. So these mistakes are not irreversible. They can be corrected if there's will. So I agree with Mamdani, but I don't think there's time yet for sort of despair. You know, something can be done. And the sooner that is done, I think the better.
Okay, Mamdani, his father, quoted in the book where he states that improvisation, cynically celebrated as innovation, is the order of the day. Programs of study drawing on several disciplines are slapped together and taught by cheap part-time staff, with all due respect to part-time staff, many of whom fail to meet stated criteria for employment. Is this recent decision the culmination of this crisis, you think?
Well, I don't necessarily agree that the university cannot be allowed to innovate. I think that's a bit, on Mamdani's part, a bit too harsh. I think he's mixing two variables that can be separate. There's a role for the government in higher education, but there's also a need for responsive higher education. We cannot just teach courses that are not relevant to the market. I don't think there's something necessarily problematic about the marketplace, because we must be relevant. The university cannot churn out people who are not needed, or teach courses that, you know, that just, we cannot engage in self-gratification, because our graduates must be relevant to the market. So I think there's something to be said for a responsive institution and innovative courses, and also for part-time staff who meet the bill. So I don't necessarily see, I think those two comparisons are problematic. The government should step in. But at the same time, I think certainly leeway should be given to the university to make some extra money, and also pay staff well, to pay us well. So a happy lecturer or happy lecturers, I think, would then be able to, I think, give their students a better deal.
Speaking of relevance, relevance to the market, the president has been a leading exponent of enforcing a radical shift towards sciences, and many of the courses that are being phased out are arts courses. Could this be part of the start of a paradigm shift, you think? And are arts courses really irrelevant as we wrap up this discussion?
Well, I think it's a very dangerous thing to say that, and that's why I think Mamdani is correct insofar as saying that certain things there's a certain core function in the university that should not be lost. I think arts are extremely important. The president himself is a proud, I think, graduate of the arts, and I think you need people like that who can be trained in the arts and respond. I don't think it's arts versus sciences. I think that's a false question to say. It's a false dichotomy to say you take one or the other.
It's a bit too simplistic.
Precisely, and therefore I think it's sort of a rolling back of the state from its core function, which is wrong. I think the state should live up to what it's supposed to do, and I think really, I think everyone's the winner for a university that works.
Thank you so much for joining us on Talk of the
Pleasure.
Nation tonight. That was Makerere University Law Don, Dr. Busiteema Kyambogo, joining us on Talk of the Nation tonight. We now take another break and return with the latest in NTV Weekend Sport.